All right, so this is the Unit 5 study guide. I'm going to try to go as quick as possible. Remember that you can pause it or rewind it, but you have to listen for this. So here we go. Exploration and expansion. What were the Europeans looking for when they started exploring? Well, if you remember the three G's that you learned in class, gold, God, and glory, do not forget that they were in the search of wealth, and that is your gold, and they want to spread their religion, especially after the Protestant and Counter Reformation. People are they feel very strongly about either being a Catholic or a Protestant, and when they go to these new lands, they want to spread their faith and their religion. When they encounter the natives, they have their own nature gods and different beliefs, and as part of their conquest, they will get them to convert to Christianity. And glory. Explorers, as well as the countries and the monarchs, want to have fame and glory and recognition for the new lands that they find, and they also want the power. In what way did the Renaissance lead to the age of exploration? Before the Renaissance, people were not as educated and were not concerned with anything outside of their existence, their own life. And when we have the Renaissance occur, people are aware of the world and they want to know more, like what is across the ocean, is there a faster trade route. Also during the Renaissance, trade booms through Italy, and when you get to exploration, they want to cut out the Italian middleman because the Italians charge you and they make you pay for trading, as well as the Ottoman Empire. um, but just keep in mind that if people were not as educated because of the Renaissance, exploration wouldn't have occurred. We wouldn't question what's across the ocean. We wouldn't say, "Hey, do you think there's gold and silver here?" Or "Is there new land? Is there a faster trade route?" Explain the effects of smallpox and disease on the natives in the Americas. What you need to understand is that smallpox, as well as other diseases that came over from the old world, which is Europe, Asia, Africa, will destroy 90% of the population. When we talk about the natives, I believe they go from 40 million to either 7 million, or what is it? Yeah, something like that. There's going to be 90% of the population gets decimated through disease. It is not that the Native Americans are weak people. They are not a weak group of people, but their immune systems have never experienced these diseases, whereas Africans, Asians, and Europeans had been dealing with these diseases for centuries. And when the natives come in contact with smallpox, their bodies have no immunities to fight it because they've never experienced it before. It's just like us with the common cold or the flu. We have immunities to certain things, or our body builds an immunity to fight certain things like a cold. And even now in our society, we have medicine that can help us prevent these diseases, whereas during this time, they do not have modern medicine. What began the African slave trade? All right, the slave trade is going to occur when the Native American population decreases in the Americas. The Europeans are like, we need an alternative. And the alternative will be Africans. A lot of people think that slavery just occurred just with Africans. It was all groups in the world at some time have been enslaved, first of all. Secondly, when we talk about slavery, it's not some European man trapping Africans. African kingdoms took over other African tribes and sold those conquered tribes into the Atlantic slave trade to receive manufactured goods such as rum and guns. But back to the Atlantic slave trade, the rise in Africans being participating in the Atlantic slave trade is going to be that the Native American population has diminished to the point where they seem to have no value to the Europeans to work their land. So they decide to talk to the African kingdoms and get Africans to be sent to South America and North America and work on these plantations and have these cash crops. Now let's explain the triangular trade model. The three areas that are involved is Europe, Africa, and the Americas. What you need to think is that those routes of travel and trade form a triangle, and the triangle you start in Europe. Europe creates manufactured goods which are sent to Africa. In exchange for the manufactured goods such as guns and rum and clothing and gold and silver and all types of things that African kings want during this time to put themselves in the running as superpowers, like with guns. If you had guns, you can fight other civilizations. But I'm going to go off on a tangent, and I don't want to do that. So back to the point. Manufactured goods come from Europe. They go to Africa. The African kings, in exchange for the manufactured goods, take the slaves and give them to the Europeans. The Europeans put the Africans on a ship, and they spend their time in a voyage that lasts from 3 to 6 weeks. This voyage is called Middle Passage because it's the middle leg of the triangle. They leave Africa, they take the slaves to either South or North America. Believe it or not, Brazil and South America received the largest, and the Caribbean as well, received the highest population of slaves. A lot of people always assume it's North America, but it's not. It's South America. Because remember, the Spanish and the Portuguese had a large hold on the South America during this time. So they send them to either North or South America. These people work on the plantation and create these cash crops, which ultimately cotton, tobacco, wood, anything were considered raw materials. The raw materials were sent from the colonies back to Europe and then turned into the manufactured goods that were ultimately traded with Africa. This is the model of triangular trade, and you have it in your notes. So you need to look back and see how it's laid out and who plays into who and who's exchanging what. When we talk about the idea of mercantilism, what you need to understand is that mercantilism, I want you to think of merchant, trade, wealth, a business. When we talk about mercantilism, it is a nation's wealth is based off of its gold, like its gold and silver. Every nation has a certain amount of wealth, and the whole world does, and you have to compete to be the wealthiest in the world. And it also discusses how colonies only serve the mother country. That is their main purpose, and they bring in revenue for the mother country. For number 6, what is the Columbian Exchange and what are the effects on the natives? Columbian Exchange is the exchange of animals, plants, and diseases from the Old World to the New World and from the New World to the Old World. How does it affect the natives? You have learned already in class that the natives and the European relationship starts out kind of nice, like, oh, we're going to be friends, and then eventually it gets violent, there's disease, and there's epic death for the natives, okay? Once people realize that the Americas has rich soil, different plant life, the Europeans are going to see the greed factor and jump on it, okay? Absolutism. What is an absolute monarch? It is a monarch that has absolute and complete control over the government. What is a constitutional monarch? Is when you have a king or a queen in place, but there's a constitution, which is a document or a social contract or agreement between the people and the monarch that limits their powers. Example, King John the Soft Sword. You have the Magna Carta limited his power. When you talk about England and the Glorious Revolution, they have a constitution that limits the powers of the monarch, so the monarch can't be an absolute tyrant to the people. What is divine right? It is the idea that God has chosen the monarchy and they are destined to be king or queen of society, okay? How did this idea of the divine right affect the actions of European monarchs? It gave them an explanation for any type of behavior that they committed. Well, God chose me, or God chose my family to be the monarch. You can't argue with what I say because I am chosen by God and the church. It's kind of a reinforcement for any type of decision or behavior that they commit. What was the Glorious Revolution? How was it significant to English history? Glorious Revolution is dealing with William and Mary. They will be restored to the English throne, but under the idea that they have to agree to a constitution that gives the people more rights and limits their rights as the monarchy of England, and they cannot take too many powers, okay? They're going to have the English Bill of Rights, and it's an agreement that will limit the power of the monarch and give some of it to the people. And also give Parliament more power, which is the decision-making branch or lawmaking branch in England. Who is Louis the 14th? He is known as the Sun King. And where does he live? He is the King of France. And he is known as the Sun King. And he is a lavish king who had a beautiful palace called Versailles, where he lived and he made all of his government decisions as well. How did Peter the Great, why did he desire to modernize Russia? When we talk about the modernization of Russia, the first word that I want you to think is westernization. All the nations to the west, or all the countries or nation states as we can call them, to the west of Russia were fast-paced, educated monarchs were moving forward, trying to progress, and the ideas of the Enlightenment and things like that were spreading rapidly in Western Europe, France, Britain. And when Peter the Great takes over Russia, he realizes that Russia needs to get in the game and try to catch up. When you are modern, when you can be a competitor with other nation states, then you are less likely to be invaded. You are less likely to be looked down upon. And so Peter the Great wants to westernize Russia and make them similar to the culture to the west, like France and Britain and Spain and Portugal, and make Russia more of a competitive nation during this time. Moving on to the scientific revolution. Why were observation and experimentation important during the scientific revolution? Remember that the scientific revolution is strictly based on science, and so you have to observe and see and experiment to prove that something exists. Scientists are very, if you can prove it, then it could possibly be right. If you can't prove it, then I'm not believing you. I have to have evidence, which is a great word that goes with experimentation. You have to understand that you have to observe things to see how they develop. You have to observe if your theories or ideas that you think of work. Same thing with experimentation. You can't just design a process and not test it to see if it works and then tell everyone it works. That's not good. You have to go through the process, experiment, see if what you've decided or thought of actually is relevant. What is the purpose of the scientific revolution? First of all, the word revolution means change. When we talk about science after the Enlightenment, after the Renaissance, you're going to have people open their minds and see that maybe all the ancient ideas are not the best ideas, and that we need to prove or physically try to understand how things came about. How does the human body work? What is the deal with gravity? Like, the laws of gravity were established during this time. Calculus, things like this. People are putting the pedal to the metal in their brains, and they're trying to figure out how the wheels and knobs and everything turn in society for science. Like, you have people who study circulation during this time, the heart, anatomy. It's just like when we talked about Da Vinci in the Renaissance and how we discussed that he was doing sketches and he was studying the human body. These guys are going to take it further. They're going to dissect bodies. They're going to study circulation. Newton comes up with 3 laws of gravity, calculus. You have Boyle's law. All of these ideas and concepts, equations are going to develop during this time that we still use or talk about today. Name 3 people from the scientific revolution and their accomplishments. I believe you have a handout on that, so I'm going to let you handle number 14 on your own. Number 15, John Locke is all about natural rights. Okay, natural rights. Rousseau is going to talk about the social contract. You need to look back on both of these in your notes, please. Adam Smith, laissez-faire economics. You need to remember what Miss Cannon talked about in the Enlightenment video, or if your teacher talked about it to you. Laissez-faire. It's hands-off economics, okay? And in your notes, it should explain more about what Adam Smith discusses about the invisible hand and how the government needs to stay out of the economic system and that it can work itself out. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. Please look back in your notes. What did John Locke believe concerning natural rights? You have the right for life, liberty, and the right to own property. John Locke believes that people were born naturally good, and that yes, we should have some type of government system, but people should still have their rights. And if the government does not protect your rights of life, liberty, and the right to own property, then it is the people's job to overthrow that government. What did Montesquieu argue for in the spirit of the laws? I will let you look back on your notes. Also, do not forget to compare Hobbes and Rousseau and then how they differ as well. Number 19, the Enlightenment ideals. How did they affect the United States? John Locke, life, liberty, and the right to own property sounds very similar to the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Locke Rousseau, Montesquieu, all of these individuals um, will inspire people in the Americas or in the 13 colonies to rebel against their monarch, who's an absolute monarch who taxes them without representation. All of these ideas will spread to these colonies, and people will read it and think, we're under an absolute monarchy who doesn't even live in our colonies and know what our life is about, but makes us pay taxes without us letting us be represented in our parliament that makes these decisions. What is a salon? A salon is a social gathering where they discuss philosophy, science, the government, history, and theories. Okay. Um, it's like having coffee and having a serious discussion about issues in the world and society. People still, in a way, have salons now. We just don't really call them that. They're just social gatherings and discussing the important matters of the world. The American Revolution, the Stamp Act. Why did colonists object to it? First of all, they objected to it because they didn't agree about it. You have to think about that there's taxation without representation. Consistently, the British monarch will decide that the colonists have to pay taxes to help Britain get out of their debt from the French and Indian War. And they place a stamp tax on every paper document. So if you have anything that you're sending or doing anything, you have to get a stamp and pay for it as in a tax form. It's going to outrage the colonists because they do not feel that it is just for a leader to decide that they have to pay a tax without them being represented in the government. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson. Why is it significant? Because he's telling Britain, okay, we asked you 2 or 3 times to please compromise with us, allow us to be represented, and since you will not allow us as colonies to have our voice heard, we declare that we want to break away and have independence and become our own nation. What is the Constitution? Constitution is our founding laws for our nation. It is significant. We still use it today. Granted, we do have the Bill of Rights and amendments that have helped change the Constitution, and that's why we consider it a living document, because it is still changed as our society changes. Look up Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Please look it up tonight. Google it. Okay? What did he write about? He's going to have a lot of Enlightenment ideas, but he's going to be a big inspiration to the colonists. Please look it up tonight. Now, French Revolution. What were the causes of the French Revolution? First of all, you have inequalities in the old order. You have 3 estates that consist of the social classes of France: the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. The first estate consists of the king and the church. The second estate consists of the nobles, which are the educated, wealthy individuals. And then you have the third estate, which consists of the bourgeoisie and the peasants and the common people. Population-wise, the first estate is 1% of the population. The nobles is 2% of the population, and the third estate is 97% of the population. What I would like for you to understand is that the 2 higher tiers of the estate system have more money and more power in the government. But what's interesting is that the third estate pays more in taxes than anybody else. The nobles barely pay taxes. The king tries to get them to do it, and the nobles are like, no, we're good. So what you need to understand is that there's inequalities in the old order. France is in debt. And also, Louis XVI is an awful king. He spends money on parties. He does not make sure that his poor are taken care of. When you have 97% of the population that are dealing with starvation and not being able to bring bread home to their family, but you throw lavish parties and your wife buys dresses and wigs and shoes because she's Queen of France, that is going to make 97% of the population extremely upset. This population also cannot vote and does not have a voice in the government. I kind of answered number 26 and number 27. What you need to understand is that after the French Revolution, the French Revolution, from what you've learned today and yesterday probably, it was way more chaotic than the American Revolution. And a couple of things that occur is that they try to switch to a republic. And when you try to switch to a republic, it's very difficult. It's very similar to what happened with Rome. They went from having a republic to one sole person trying to take over the whole nation. And France is going to deal with that. And it's going to take France a very long time to be consistent. They get Napoleon and he tries to expand the empire, but it backfires and he ends up creating a lot more enemies for the nation of France. This is me reviewing your study guide. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your teacher, and we will definitely review with you tomorrow. Happy studying.